A country with a democratically elected Jewish president who wants closer ties with the West, rather than a massive campaign in the East. However, the Kremlin opted for a series of tactical mini-offensives there, aimed at steadily gaining ground to try to encircle Ukrainian forces. The Russian leadership is urging the military command to show at least some gains. And it has nothing else to do but to keep sending more troops into the carnage, said Mykola Sunhorovsky, a military expert at the Kyiv-based Razumkov Center think tank. Many in the West expected Putin to declare a broad mobilization to fill up the Russian ranks. British Defence Secretary Ben Wallace warned that Putin might time an announcement to Victory Day. But it never happened. And Russia has continued to rely on a limited force that was clearly insufficient against Ukrainian defenses. A massive mobilization would likely foment broad discontent in Russia, fuel anti-war sentiment and carry massive political risks. Authorities opted for more limited options, with lawmakers drafting a bill to waive the current age limit of 40 for those willing to sign up. For the military, the lack of resources was underlined last week by an abrupt Russian withdrawal from areas near Kharkiv, Ukraine's second-largest city that has been bombarded since the start of the war. Some of those forces apparently were redeployed to the Donbass. But it wasn't enough to tip the scales on the battlefield. They really had to thin out the troops they had around Kharkiv. Simply because they're trying to hold to too much of a line with too few troops, said Phillips O'Brien, professor of strategic studies at the University of St Andrews in Scotland. The Donbass fighting has increasingly morphed into artillery duels. And it might go on for quite a long time without much movement in the lines, he said. So it will be a more of a positional battle at that point. O'Brien added, with success going to whoever can take the pounding. Ukraine, meanwhile, continues to get a steady flow of Western weapons, including U.S. howitzers and drones, tanks from Poland and other heavy gear that is immediately sent into combat. Ukraine's plan is simple and obvious. Wear down the Russian forces in the nearest months as much as possible. Win time for receiving Western weapons and training how to use them. And then launch a counteroffensive in the southeast, said Sunhorovsky, the Kyiv-based military expert. He said Ukraine hopes to receive even more powerful Western weapons, such as US HIMARS multiple rocket launchers, anti-ship missiles and more potent air defense weapons. The Eastern deadlock has angered hardliners in Russia, who warned that Moscow can't win if it doesn't conduct a massive mobilization and concentrate all of its resources in a decisive attack. Igor Strelkov, a former security officer who led the separatists in the Donbass in 2014, denounced what he described as the Kremlin's indecision, saying it could pave the way for defeat. For Russia, the strategic deadlock is deepening, he said. Ukrainian authorities, meanwhile, are increasingly emboldened by the slow pace of the Russian offensive and growing Western support. While Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky reaffirmed last week that pushing the Russians back to their pre-invasion positions would represent a victory, some of his aides declared even more ambitious goals. Advisor Mikhailo Podolyak said Ukraine isn't interested in a ceasefire until Russia is ready to fully liberate occupied territories, a bold statement that appears to reflect hopes for reclaiming the Donbass and Crimea. Russia, meanwhile, apparently aims to bleed Ukraine by methodically striking fuel supplies and infrastructure while making grinding military gains in the east. The Kremlin may also hope that Western interest in the conflict will eventually fade. Their final hope is that we will lose interest completely in the conflict in Ukraine by the summer, Crump said. They're calculating the Western audiences will lose interest in the same way as Afghanistan last year. Russia thinks that time is working in its favor. Danica Kirka in London. Lolita C. Baldor in Washington and Yuras Karmanow in Lviv, Ukraine. Contributed. Follow app's coverage of the war in Ukraine. https apnews.com/hub/Russia-Ukraine. Thanks for listening to this important news update. Please subscribe to our channel to stay updated with the latest news.